Thank you, Galoran, and welcome everybody to the forum today. My name is David Kearns. I'm the Principal Consultant in Carbon Capture Technologies with the Institute, usually based in Melbourne, Australia. Very pleased to be here in Brussels with you all today. This session is going to be, I guess, a broad level overview based primarily on the content in our Global Status of CCS report, which we put out every year, with a few sort of updates from February of this year. The status of CCS as it stands at the moment, we have a lot of facilities in development around the world. We presently have 65 operational carbon capture and storage facilities globally. They take up a capacity of 57 million tonnes per annum of capture capacity. So we've seen very sort of strong growth in the development. But also, equally importantly, we have another 44 million tonnes of capacity under construction. So these are projects that have passed FID. They're going to be built, they're going to be operational. And so we're really looking at, in the relatively short term, having over 100 million tonnes per annum of global capture capacity, which is very exciting. And more importantly than that, we have another 450 million in earlier stages of development. So we're really in a stage now where CCS is beginning to take off, it's beginning to accelerate, it's having some very strong prospects globally. You'll notice from the locations of the facility dots is that there is a very wide geographic spread for these facilities. So there's plenty of prospects in Europe, in North America, the Middle East, in Asia, and in Australia. So it's a very sort of exciting time to be involved in CCS. This is our capture facility pipeline project chart. We update this every year with our status report, going all the way back to 2010. And it's really broken up into four categories. So early development are projects undergoing feasibility. And advanced development projects are those undergoing a FEED study. So there's a certain enhanced level of commitment. In construction means they've passed FID, and then operational means they've been commissioned and or are up and running. And I guess the most noticeable thing is the very sharp acceleration that we've seen over the last 6 or 7 years across the pipeline. The dark blue section at the very bottom represents the operational projects, and as you can see, they've been steadily growing over the years, including a little step up since July of last year to February of this year. And so really that gives us confidence that these projects are going to continue to grow and develop over time. It's really been seen as the impetus towards heading towards net zero is beginning to translate into real project developments. So it's a very exciting time. In terms of breakup of CCS projects by industry, this chart is a little busy, but the first two columns represent periods in the past, and you'll notice that there was a relatively small number of facilities in the first and second columns up till 2020. The period we're in now, 21 to 25, the third column, you can see there's a really, really big uptick in the number of projects across a wide array of industries. So traditionally, we saw a lot of projects in natural gas processing, and in sort of chemicals. We're starting to see a lot more of them in other industries now, and so it's giving us a lot of confidence that these projects are expanding into industries where CCS didn't have such a strong profile historically. And the pipeline that I showed you previously, when you translate it into individual projects, which is what each of these little circles represents, we really do see very, very strong growth over the next 5 years. It's going to be a very busy time for anyone involved in the CCS sector. In terms of sort of global policy and regulatory trends, we're really seeing strengthened policy support. So policy support is a fundamental necessity in order to make CCS possible. So these projects are projects that have a considerable investment attached to them. That investment can only happen if there is policy support to make the business case to build the projects possible. And so this is really the key and important role for policy. We're seeing a lot of multinational initiatives. We're seeing CCS in the global stocktake now, which is a fantastic inclusion. The upcoming NDCs are expected to include CCS investment. And so this sort of very direct mentioning and inclusion of CCS in these multinational initiatives is really going to help strengthen the case for projects going forward. We're also seeing increased CCS presence in legal frameworks in particular jurisdictions. So in the US, there's sort of expanding and refining of the existing regimes. The US is a relatively mature jurisdiction as far as CCS regulation is concerned. In Europe and the UK and Australia, We're seeing really a lot of building on existing regimes as well, and we're seeing that translating into a lot more projects at the moment, which is very exciting, including the transboundary movement of CO2 across national borders, particularly with the shipping industry. This is something with a lot of regulatory concerns that have to be addressed, and it's really good to see that the nations involved are getting seriously involved in that. In the Middle East, Southeast Asia and Brazil, we're seeing a lot of new CCS legislation coming into the fore. The Institute's been instrumental in helping some of those countries get their regulatory regimes underway. And they've really had the opportunity to build on the best practice that they've observed in the more mature countries. So that does help to accelerate things. We just have a breakdown of countries by CCS projects. As you can see, the United States is really the dominant country at present. And you can see also the level of growth from the right-hand side, which was 2 years ago, to the left-hand side, which is now. And we're seeing that growth really across all of these jurisdictions. It's a very exciting time. In terms of business models and financing, project de-risking is really a key. So CCS investments are significant investments. They're process projects and they're drilling projects and so on. There's a lot of direct project risk as well as financial risk that has to be managed with those projects. And so the efforts in order to de-risk those projects are really necessary in order for CCS investment to go forward. We're really sort of seeing long-term direct and indirect government support is a key part of helping to de-risk them. And so that can involve things like direct financial support. It can include things like regulatory certainty around things like permitting, CO2 storage licenses and the like. We're also seeing some improvement of the financing prospects in terms of the need for things like reliable baseload power. So we know we're going to continue to need reliable baseload power into the future, but historically that's been tied up with the emissions of CO2 from the use of fossil fuels. So obviously that's going to provide an impetus for more CCS into the future. There's really a demand for high quality credits, carbon credits, including CO2 removal credits. So this is not traditional CCS, it's actually looking at removing CO2 from the atmosphere either directly with direct air capture or indirectly through things like bioenergy with CCS. The permitting schemes and the regulations around those are really, and the crediting schemes are really important to enable those projects to go forward. We're seeing more multilateral development bank support as well. This is really helping in some of the developing areas of the world. It's particularly important in places like Asia, where we're seeing a lot of developments get underway. And there's a lot of momentum in existing investments. So it's really a positive time, and so there's a lot of positives. There are a few aspects where we do have to consider that are pushing things in the opposite direction. We have seen some considerable cost inflation in CCS projects over the last few years. It's not been a steady process. It was more of a step change that happened between 2021 and 2023. That was really based on the same macroeconomic factors that drove inflation across the global economy. We're seeing a period of higher interest rates. That obviously affects financing costs. We're seeing permitting challenges in some countries, particularly for getting permits for storage wells. And in some parts of the world, we're also seeing increased political uncertainty, which does feed into the risk profile of projects as well. In terms of national and regional developments, this is a little bit of a whistle-stop tour for you. As I said, the US is really the leading country in terms of the number of facilities and their capacity at the moment. It continues to be so. 26 projects currently operational in the US with another 11 in construction. So before very long, we'll have nearly we will have nearly 40 of them up and running with more in the pipeline beyond that. There's a lot of federal and state policy incentives that are continuing to help push investment along. The very well-known 45Q and 45V federal tax credits in the US have been really fundamental to getting this industry to grow as fast as it has. And really the supportive bipartisan legal frameworks and the Inflation Reduction Act have really been instrumental in the industry getting such a strong hold. We've seen investment of well over $12 billion for carbon management and hydrogen hubs. We've seen the Inflation Reduction Act has increased the tax credits, which I think was a recognition of enabling more industries to deploy CCS, industries maybe with a higher cost profile for their projects. And we're also seeing state-level sort of incentive schemes, loans. It's really quite a broad sweep of options. We're also seeing the interesting area of data centres, which have got an ever-growing demand for electricity off the back of the AI revolution. They're looking for clean, reliable electricity 24/7. And natural gas-fired power with CCS is one prospect for those businesses to get that power. And so we're seeing projects from the likes of ExxonMobil and Baker Hughes that are working forward in that area. There is a queue of Class 6 applications growing. So Class 6 wells are the wells used for CO2 storage in the US. There has been something of a queue that's been building up of those. The applications have been coming in faster than they're being processed. So that's something that is going to need to accelerate so that projects are not held up. And we've got a lot more projects in 96 applications across 37 projects for Class 6 primacy. So that's a very exciting developments in the US. In Canada and Brazil, we're seeing 7 projects operating across those two countries, across Canada, with another 6 in construction. So Canada has very strong prospects. The investment tax credit for CCUS projects has been released. We've got the growth fund allocation for carbon contracts for difference, which is allocating up to 7 billion Canadian dollars. And back in January, there was a preliminary draft federal offset protocol for direct air capture projects, so DACs, which is very exciting. So Canada is very well placed for DACs projects. In Brazil, there's CCS legislation in place. The Fuels of the Future bill was signed into law. And they've also had some successful CCS operations at the Santos Basin offshore CCS project, where they injected 13 million tonnes of CO2. So that's actually the single, a single project delivering those kind of injection volumes is a real sign of success for Brazil. In Asia Pacific and India, we've seen 3 projects in the Asia Pacific that are operating at the moment, and another 2 in construction. We've seen standalone legislation in the key countries, so the key source countries for CO2 of Japan and South Korea, and some key receiving locations, including Indonesia and Malaysia, as well as in Western Australia, the state government in Western Australia. And a key part of that in Asia Pacific is about transboundary movements and shipping. So the Asia Pacific is very much a maritime region. Most of the CO2 movements between countries will be by ship. And so the legal frameworks to enable that to happen are very important. You'll notice there that some of the linkages between countries, one of them includes from Australia to Timor-Leste, which is actually a pipeline development. So that's moving CO2 across a maritime boundary, but by pipeline. The others are predominantly based on shipping. And we really expect to see that Australia and Indonesia and Malaysia will be sort of key receiving countries. A considerable part of their projects will be tied up with receiving CO2 from other countries. In India, there's a lot of potential. It has taken a little while for them to get going, but there seems to be some progress underway. There's been some interministerial CCUS task forces that have been working on issues, including developing technical standards. So India is a little bit less mature in terms of its developments, but the ball is definitely rolling there. In terms of Europe and the UK, there's 9 operational facilities in Europe as it stands, with 13 more under construction. And we're seeing a broad sweep of countries that are getting involved, which is very exciting. It's not just 1 or 2 countries anymore. We're seeing development really across the board, and a lot of climate and industrial policy developments, including the Net Zero Industry Act, the EU Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, the EU Clean Industrial Deal, and in the UK, £21 billion has been of support has been announced for 2 key clusters on the east and the west coast of the United Kingdom. So very exciting and very large amounts of CO2 capacity being developed for those. There's roadmaps now in 10 countries in addition to the EU. So we're really seeing this sort of growth of support and recognition of CCS as a vital carbon management technology. And we're seeing, very importantly, it's one thing to capture CO2. You obviously need to transport that to the storage sites. And so the transport and storage facility development has been surging. A lot of development, particularly in maritime transport and shipping projects. It's a very exciting time. We expect to see that that's going to grow. The North Sea has become a really important location for CO2 storage. We expect to see that strong growth will continue into the future. In China, CCUS is forging ahead. There's some prominent projects in China that have started up, particularly in the oil refining sector. It's finally getting recognition in climate policies. There's an implementation plan for green and low carbon technology demonstrations. That's really more of a technology development approach rather than a full-scale project approach. But I think it's a recognition that they need to test these technologies before they roll them out at scale. And there's a lot of interest in CCS, including in the power generation sector. China is very heavily dependent on coal-fired power as it's their primary domestic energy source. And so decarbonisation is going to probably require a lot of CCS on coal-fired power in China. The central government's also leading a lot of international collaboration. We've been seeing a lot of presence of Chinese officials and representatives in international forums, which has been very exciting. And there's lots of research exchange as well going on. There's a lot of projects getting started up. For example, the largest oxy-fuel project in the cement sector is now operational. That seemed to happen, I think, from the world's perspective fairly quietly, but real credit to China to getting that project up and running. There's also the Huaneng coal project, which will be a 1.5 million tonne capacity. That will be the world's largest project on coal-fired power to date. And also the 1 million tonne capacity project on coal-fired power that's under construction. So we're seeing sort of this steady, progressive rollout of capture on coal-fired power in China. Middle East and Africa, 3 operating projects at the moment, including the world's only operational project in the steel industry. That's an industry that's got a lot of interest in CCS at the moment. So it's interesting the Middle East was the first place that it got started. We're seeing a lot of policy developments advancing rapidly in the UAE and in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They've really announced some quite ambitious targets and objectives, and I think really the policy development is reflecting those advancing targets. Carbon markets are being established, including in the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and we're seeing a lot of collaboration internationally as well between that region. And we're also seeing some very important and welcome developments of CCS in Africa. So there's identifying of many storage sites in Egypt, which also has the potential to potentially receive CO2 in the future from other parts of the Mediterranean, as well as CCUS pilot in South Africa and a small-scale DAC project in Kenya. So Kenya is emerging as a new and interesting area for DAC, really following in the footsteps of Iceland, in that it's got favourable geology and lots of abundant renewable geothermal energy. So it's actually got the right ingredients for direct air capture. A little bit of a plug for a report that we put out the last 3 years, our technology compendium. So this is a compilation of commercial and near commercial CCS technologies from technology companies from around the world. We first brought this out in 2022 as a service to our members, and it has really grown beyond that the last few years. The most recent one in 2024 had 117 entries, and that covers technology development across the value chain. So that's CO2 capture, CO2 transport, CO2 storage, as well as sort of allied services across the industry. We're currently taking submissions for our 2025 compendium. They are due at the end of this month. And we, at the moment, are seeing really good input from a lot of companies for that. So it's very, very exciting time. So if anyone in the room is involved in a technology company, I encourage you to get a submission in and be part of this year's report. So in summary, I think the outlook globally is very positive for CCS. We're seeing a lot of increasing policy support. We're seeing increased investment. We're seeing projects achieve FID. There are still some challenges, as there always will be. Some of the investment settings are difficult to get right. It can also have some community concerns that need to be addressed. Community engagement is a seriously, very deeply important part of developing CCS projects. It's something that can't be rushed. It's one of the first things you should get rolling on whenever you do a CCS project. And in some locations, there are regulatory barriers as well. And finally, and I think this event is part of that, collaboration is really key. It's really important that we can get people talking to each other, people addressing their challenges and concerns with each other, getting that cooperation between governments and industry, research community and local communities is really going to make CCS a success into the future. So with that, my introduction is over. I'd like to hand back over to Galoran, who will lead the panel discussion on developments in the EU. Thanks, Galoran.